Okay, this is going to be Jhumpa Lahiri's Interpreter of Maladies, a story I believe came out, I want to say the late 90s. Could have been even in the aughts, but I think it was the late 90s. And again, a contemporary story, contemporary figure. Jhumpa Lahiri, she's much revered literary figure in America. She is Indian America. Her parents were immigrated from India, and she's much of at least the. This is the only book of hers I've read, but the stories I've read of her, her sort of obsession is, the Indian immigrant often experience. And here we get some. This one is something else. This is a. Honestly, her style is not my favorite. I kind of like much more figurative and higher stylists. She's very precise and neat. And it's kind of perfect. But this is also a gorgeously architectured and sort of perfectly laid out story. And again, we get at the beginning of the story we get introduced to We are in India, and one of the characters is going to be Mr. Kapeki, who has a few different jobs. He is a kind of a multilingualist, a very talented guy who is struggling sort of in India to sort of pay his rent. He has a wife. He has a loveless marriage. What appears to be a sexless marriage as well, passionless marriage, and he's a man who's very kind of conservative himself and kind of but he's very, he makes sure his shirts are ironed, his pants are pressed, and is very neat and fastidious even in sort of in his appearance. Getting slightly older now, but not a bad looking man, and he picks up the Dazes, and the Dazes are, they're again they're each the son and the daughter of Indian immigrants, and they're in India just on vacation visiting their family, and they want to go see this. They want to get out to this tourist destination. It's an old temple to see, and right away the first thing he sort of notices and honestly, Mr. Kepeki is checking out Mrs. Daz is but of a 30, 31 to kind of a voluptuous woman, at least as Mr. Kepeki sees her, and the first thing he notices again is their American immodesty. Women are much more modest in India than they are young women in America, and she's been very much Americanized. Even again, he notices, boy, they look Indian, but they sure don't act it. And again, we see her dragging her bare legs across the seats. He's looking at her legs a lot, and she's got a blouse with this sort of there's a sort of and she's got a little strawberry down here, and I guess showing just maybe a little bit of cleavage, and he seems to be focused on that. She shows much more, but poor Mr. Kepeki is going to maybe pull a hamstring, in that front seat, Anyway, so he's very taken with her. He's crushing on her pretty quickly, and he's noticing. But one thing he also notices is the two of them. But he doesn't have much. They seem like kind of chill. They have kids with them, right? She has three little children. They're all, I think, below. Maybe the oldest is around 10 or 12, and the youngest is maybe 5. Summers like that. And one of there's a little girl who, and she's sort of not paying much attention. He asks how long it's going to take, and she's oh God, you were too much of a tight ass to get an air-conditioned car, weren't you? So they're bickering, and he said they bicker almost like they're the ones who are siblings, and he can't imagine them being able to take care of anybody. So a very sort of immaturity he's noticing with this young American couple, and kind of coldness from the Mrs. Daz. Even if she is physically attractive toward her daughter asks to she can have a dab of nail polish. She's like, leave me alone. They argue over who has to take the little girl to the bathroom. These do not seem to be the best parents in the world, and she really doesn't seem to be a very feeling mother. The husband is sort of clueless, it seems like, and sort of ineffectual and sort of goofy. And at the end, he's going to prove to be sort of physically not very well, maybe masculine. He doesn't. Toward the end, when young Bobby is in trouble with the monkey, he sort of freezes and doesn't do anything. It's Kepeki that has to come save him. But anyway, first they're heading in the car, and they start. The conversation starts. Asks what. he does, and he says, "I'm an interpreter of maladies," and again, a gorgeous phrase there, though, I must say, by Lahiri. And she's like, "Well, what's that?" And he turns out he's an interpreter for a country doctor, basically, and he speaks all the dialects of all the all these people in India, and can sort of help the doctor figure out what's going on with all these people. And she finds that she's sort of taken with that. Wow, that's amazing that you could do that. And no one's been amazed that this. It's really not a real high level or a high status job he has. So he's certainly swooning. That this pretty young lady in the back seat is sort of interested in his work. And eventually, the husband's always with the camera, and he's sort of clueless. They do eventually get to and again, this constant sort of noticing her body and her legs, and they go to the temple. And again, they are acting like tourists in their homeland, right? This young American, and they are American, but their parents are right from there, and their parents actually moved back there. So it seems like they should have more of a connect. But they seem to be every bit as clueless about Indian culture as a typical white couple would be coming from America, right? And anyway, they go to, and there's all these sort of friezes and everything, and artistic friezes in this temple, and they all seem to be these erotic drawings of voluptuous females hanging onto the sizable thigh of a male warrior or something, and it's all these sorts of everything seems to have sexual imagery. He's looking at the back of her thighs, she's walking back to the car. They do, and he's trying to keep the ride going because he wants to spend more time with her because he's crushing on her, and he does talk about going to this little park, I guess, and they make a second stop, and she lets the kids go up, and she comes up in the front seat with him, and it does seem like the way the story is unfolding that, oh wow, maybe Mr. Kopecki's going to get a little adventure here, but that's not really what happens. She wants to talk to him, and she tells him that, and he looks at, he notices the one little boy, Bobby, is a little bit more aggressive. There's monkeys there, and he's sort of shaking his stick at the monkeys, and kind of the other two are sort of a little bit scared of the monkeys. And he's a brave little boy, he says, and he's, yeah, that's because it's not my husband's. She sort of tossed it off, and he's like, excuse me? And then she tells him the story, and that her husband's friend from college had come and stayed with them for a few days. And had sort of put his arm, and basically seduced her. And while the first baby, was still in their playpen, they kind of had sex on the couch with all the toys around and everything. And it seemed like a somewhat exhilarating, but not even that exhilarating sort of sex. She seemed to think he made love to her with an expertise that her husband never seemed to have, and didn't sort of give her the longing looks afterwards. So I don't know. There was but anyway, the guy then gets his job. He was hired. He was only there for a few days. He flies back to England, and she got pregnant. And so that baby's actually illegitimate. It's not her husband's. They still exchange Christmas cards, but they never see her. And she tells him, she was like, "Well, what do I do? I've hated myself ever since, and and he's like, well, that's not really what I do. What interpreter, I interpret what people see. She said, well, because of your job, but you already. There's no mystery to why you feel bad. You just feel guilty. And it's because you did a terrible thing." And of course she, gets all in a huff, and again, almost a little bit typical American sort of spoiledness here, kind of walks off. This was after, and she'd taken his phone number and everything. It was going to write. He imagined they were going to be pen pals. She was going to send him a picture they'd all taken together, and he sort of imagined they were going to be pen pals. But she sort of storms off, in a bit of a huff, and he's been warning them not to let any food fall on the ground. Of course, she has these rice cakes, and there's crumbs falling on the ground, and the monkeys are starting to kind of scurry in behind them. And again, kind of interesting that this lost woman of Indian descent does go to an Indian interpreter to hope that somehow she could figure out what's. But it's also at the same time sort of blind and not really taking full responsibility for what she did. Anyway, she walks off. She can't. Where's Bobby? They can't find Bobby, and it turns out Bobby's now surrounded by a bunch of these little monkeys, and one of the monkeys has gotten hold of a little stick and is whipping him about he's got shorts on. He's whipping him about his bare legs with it and sort of cutting into him a bit. And the husband doesn't really, kind of freezes and doesn't do anything. And Mr. Kopecki's the one he knows how to get rid of. Just sort of waves, makes noise, and slaps his stick on the ground. The monkeys all go scurrying back into their trees. And they're like, all right, let's just go. And finally, the woman says, let's go. This place gives me the creeps. Boy, what a sad last line that is. And about the immigrant who's completely lost touch with their ancestry, with their homeland. This place gives me the creeps, and she walks off. And as she walks off, the little piece of paper she'd written Mr. Kopecki's number on, where he was hoping they're going to stay in touch, or his address, sort of tumbles out and kind of gets blown away in the breeze. That's how the story ends. So that is Interpreter of Maladies, Jhumpa Lahiri.